Please note this podcast discusses real-life crimes and may include sensitive topics such as violence, abuse, and other disturbing content. We recommend listener discretion.
We searched his house and we brought back lots of samples of ritual and ritualism. Little things like crosses in glass files, rodents that had nails pushed through their heads. We knew that these were items that were used in ceremonies.
I'm journalist Helen Fospero.
I'm crime reporter Martin Brunt.
And this is True Criminals.
A journey into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld with insights from decades of true crime reporting.
The stories behind the stories, plus exclusive interviews with those closely involved in notorious cases.
Re-examining crimes so shocking, they still haunt our imaginations.
Welcome to the second episode of True Criminals, exploring the mystery of Adam, the child's torso found in the Thames in 2001.
It's one of the most haunting cases I've covered, and I've covered a few. In September 2001, a child's torso was found floating in the River Thames in London. It set in motion an investigation that would span continents, push the boundaries of forensic science, and it also gave police new insight into human trafficking, a big subject today. It seemed like an impossible case, a victim with no identity. There was no crime scene, no witnesses. But the post-mortem examination indicated perhaps a ritual killing and a potential link to Africa.
We're joined again by Andy Baker, who oversaw the investigation. Andy, we left the investigation as you returned from South Africa, where Sangoma Credo Mutwa suggested that the style of killing was not from South Africa, but from further north. Back in Britain, new analysis supported Credo Mutwa's idea that Adam was originally from West Africa.
Yeah, that's right, Helen. The forensic science back then, you're talking nearly 25 years ago, it wasn't as sophisticated and you didn't have the data that we've got today. Ray Feisch, bless him, he spent hours and hours at home pouring through numbers around what linked with what. So basically, you turn the isotope evidence into algorithms and you come up with the numbers and then you can see what aligns with what.
What is isotope evidence?
I remember an advert for Lucozade where it was John Barnes did this thing about drink Lucozade, you'd be a great sportsman. And he drank some Lucozade and this kind of thing, light went through his body, showing a makeup of his body. So isotopes are the atoms that make up the chemical elements within your body that come together. So it's anything in the periodic table as such. It could be strontium, lithium, iron, and I can go on and on and on. But we've all got this in the body, but it's based on what you consume, what you eat, what you drink. Basically, you are what you eat.
And could that give you a clue as to where this little boy was from, perhaps?
At the time, I didn't know. They came up with stable isotopes. I said, OK, break that down for us. So we're drinking bottled water right now. So wherever that was made will reflect in our bodies that that's inside us as such. So it's the atoms of the chemical structures in your body, but it's based on your consuming food and water. So even though we're drinking bottled water, you drink tap water, so it'd be local reservoirs, your clothes are washed in a certain way. And Will O'Reilly talks about like the rings in a tree. It can actually go backwards and say where you were at a particular time because you were drinking water from this reservoir. So it reflects geographically where you've come from. And when they did the stable isotope analysis of Adam's body, they found that his makeup was from Precambrian rock. And the only parts of the world where that exists is in Africa, in that part of the corner of Africa that's Nigeria, into Benin and around there, Cameroon. So that was our focus. The problem was, whilst we had loads of samples, say, from Windermere and from London, we didn't have many samples for comparison from that part of the world. So Ray Feisch, Will O'Reilly and a guy called Andy Hercart went over to Nigeria and they drove 10,000 kilometres with assistance from Nigerian police force and brought back samples from bushmeat, from pathology, and we had to get a special licence to bring it back into the UK. So their security team, they had about 6 officers that drove with them on that road trip, right the way up to Kano in the north, all around Lagos. They took all these samples and they came back with hundreds of samples for comparison. And they were then able to find from those samples that our little boy Adam was brought up in a 50-mile width by 150-mile length between Benin City and Ibadan in Nigeria.
That's extraordinary.
So think of like a satellite picture that's open up and you then come down, you come right down to that 100 by 50 mile line of where he came from.
That narrowed down the area where you could tell that Adam had grown up in his, had lived in his very short...
In his formative years, yeah.
His very short life.
So we knew forensically that Adam, in his formative years, had lived in Africa. We know also that he had lived some part in Germany because he reflected consuming food and water from Germany. We knew he'd been murdered in London because when we looked at the pollen in his body, he had breathed London pollen. About 14 makeups of different trees and plants, of which 3 were isolated to London. So we knew he'd been murdered in London. We knew that. It was our murder. It wasn't a torso that was brought into the country.
But how did that help you, Andy? Why, she says perhaps rather naively, why did it matter exactly where he came from?
Because we needed to find his family. We didn't know if his family had perpetrated the murder or, as was emerging, and we know much more so now, Adam had been given up in traffic. So apart from going to South Africa and Credo, Mutwa was saying it was in the north, we also went to Nigeria where we took all these samples. Then we went back to Nigeria and we started taking DNA samples for them, familial and geographical DNA. And I sent a small team over for that. And when we went over to them, we were hopeful that we would not necessarily stumble across, but we would come across someone that was related to Adam in some way.
It was very basic stuff because I was with you when you and your detectives were wandering through specific villages, asking people if they were aware of a child that had gone missing.
It was like a missing person inquiry in the villages. People were living in mud huts that we were going to these villages. The corners of these villages, they had fencing around them to protect them from animals or whatever. But we were told that some body parts would be put in those corners of that fencing to protect them from evil spirits. So the whole mentality, this culture was coming across to us. And when we went and took those samples, we would also say, do you know about a little boy? We also found out that to get a passport, this is where the immigration issue that's going on in the UK and across the world, and the particular issue with small boats right now, we were seeing it emerging then. You can sell a child for less than $50. A passport would be $500. Now, the value of life was pretty low where we were going to. And this was a complete eye-opener to us that brought home what they thought of Adam to kill him in such a way, because he was more valuable dead in the belief of Juju than he was alive and allowed to grow up and live his life as anyone else would be.
You were narrowing down the area of West Africa where Adam had spent his early years, but you still hadn't found his family there in one of those villages. You still were lacking a suspect, but you did find a suspect, but a lot nearer home.
A lot nearer home. In fact, to begin with, it wasn't that close, but we'd identified where the shorts, we knew that they were bought in Woolworths in Germany. We'd identified that Adam had come from that 100-mile gap between Ibadan and Benin City. We identified it had a concoction. Credo's words to us had come true that he was from the north. And the team then got a phone call one day from a uniformed police officer in Scotland who was sitting at the back of the family court up in Scotland. Very different system to what we have in England and Wales. Inquisitorial, not adversarial, but it was a family court hearing, and there was a woman in court pleading to have her 2 daughters given back to her.
From care.
From care. We understand that she had come into the UK, into England, and had been dispersed when she had been picked up by social services.
She was a Nigerian asylum seeker.
Yes, right. And then the policy was that they dispersed them around the country. She went up to Scotland and she said that she wanted her 2 daughters back to perform a ritual ceremony. And the officer at the back kind of woke up to these words. He'd seen our appeal when we had named Adam and said we would be his family and people of London would be his community. And he made the call and he gave us the name Joyce Osogidi. Her kids had been taken into care up in Scotland. She'd been sent up there as part of that policy of asylum seekers being put around the country. She was asking for her kids back. She said that she wanted this to protect them because her husband had been involved in ritual and ritual murder in the past. And we thought, wow, just shows you the power of that publicity that we might have lost if we put the case away and not done all that press conference and raced in that game.
So you got a search warrant for her home in Glasgow?
What happened was, we made an inquiry up there. A couple of officers went up, one of them being Nick Chalmers, and as he was talking to Joyce Osogidi, they noticed at first there was a lot of clothing around and someone noticed that it was girls' clothing. And then whilst one was speaking to Joyce, Nick saw that there was an envelope with an address in Catford on it. So he noted the address. When he came back down, they went to the address and they said, well, there was a woman that came round and she was waiting in the hall. And we worked out, obviously, she's stolen this post from the hall in the address in Catford. So we got a search warrant, went up there, searched her address, and we found clothing with the same label as the orange shorts that Adam had been wearing when he was taken from the Thames, Kids and Company.
And you also found links with an address in South London and a tenant called Kingsley Ojo, a Nigerian from Benin City, where Joyce was from originally.
Yeah, that came later. She first of all claimed that she was from a war-torn country and claimed an asylum, not from Nigeria. We took her DNA because we thought she may be related to Adam. And DNA in those days, back in 2001, it was roughly anything up to 7 days to get a return of that DNA analysis. Ray Feisch pushed it so hard we got the result back in 9 hours, which was negative. So she wasn't related to Adam. However, we had further information coming in from Hamburg. She did have 2 girls and a boy with her at one time. And then the name Kingsley Ojo came up as well. Kingsley Ojo turned out to be a witch doctor. We kept him under observation. First of all, interest, see what he had to say for himself, and then we kept him under surveillance. He had mastered the business of illegal immigration by bringing people through late at night into small airports in East Anglia. And what he would do it almost on the last flight when the small airports were closing down and maybe there weren't even officers there to check who the people were. And then what they would do is they would get a passport of someone, say a child of 6 or a man of 20 or a woman of 40, have her passport, and then they'd post it back or take it back, and another child of 6, a man of 20, a woman of 40 could use it again. Because they were similar in description, because it was basically just a visual look.
You charged Kingsley Ojo and got him convicted and deported.
After a period of time, we searched his house, first of all. We arrested him and we brought back lots of exhibits, samples of ritual and ritualism. Little things like crosses in glass files, rodents that had nails pushed through their heads and things like that. So we knew from the work we'd undertaken before in South Africa and in Nigeria that these were items that were used in ceremonies.
This was all good background knowledge for your investigation.
Not just good background knowledge. It pointed towards that Ojo could have been involved because the link with Joyce Osogidi. And we were satisfied that Ojo actually brought Adam into the country. He was charged with a number of offences, including fraud of passports himself and misuse of passports. And he got a few years imprisonment and he went to prison. So that was about July 2002.
In addition to co-hosting True Criminals, Helen hosts her own award-winning podcast, The Convex Conversation. If you're eager to learn more about the inspiring guests she interviews, from royalty to astronauts, from industry leaders to explorers, check it out at convex.podbean.com. or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to yours.
And if you're curious to dive deeper into Martin's work as a crime reporter, I had the pleasure of interviewing him about his book, No One Got Cracked Over the Head for No Reason, Dispatches from a Crime Reporter, on my podcast. In this episode, Martin shares some gripping stories that resonate with the themes we explore here on True Criminals. You can find links to that episode in our show notes or on the True Criminals page at audiobleachglobal.com.
You went back to Joyce Ozagidi and you got more confessions from her about potential links with Adam.
Yes, Joyce told us that he was involved with bringing Adam into the country. We spoke to Joyce again and again, and she told us much more about Ojo and how he was involved in illegal immigration and organised immigration crime. And it wasn't just Ojo, there was some other people on the periphery as well. Joyce Ozagidi, Will O'Reilly put together a report for conspiracy to murder. We were told that the Director of Public Prosecutions personally wanted to look at this case and, if need be, prosecute it. The papers were submitted to him in 2009 through the Crown Prosecution Service of conspiracy to murder, naming Joyce Ozagidi and other people, but they said there was insufficient evidence to charge her.
Part of the evidence against her was that she even admitted buying orange shorts like those that Adam had been wearing.
Oh, no, she said they were her daughter's shorts and she'd given them to Adam. We knew that she'd looked after a little boy, but the problem is that her mental health was questionable. Consequently, that, I think, was one of the deciding factors of not charging her, because her confessions may have been decided as unreliable.
So what happened to Joyce?
Well, a decision was made to deport her back to Nigeria. When she came from, we proved that she was from Nigeria, not from another country in Africa. Commercial airlines wouldn't take her because of the link with Ritual, and other people on the aircraft might have been upset by that or done something to her. So it was decided to deport her in a private aircraft, and Will O'Reilly and Nick Chalmers went with them. And she even spoke then more about what was going on in these circumstances of illegal immigration and this ritual ceremony that was going on that I wouldn't say we crushed, that we had halted.
And it's so clear to me, speaking to you today, how much this case means to you. And I'm so glad that you didn't let it just get written off the books and not looked into. But it has been now more than 2 decades since Adam was found in the water. What keeps you hopeful that perhaps this case might still one day be fully solved?
Allegiances change. People get arrested. People talk. We know that even though the immigration problem reflects Afghanistan, Vietnam in the main, but there's other people coming from Central Africa still. There's someone out there knows. The truth will come out at some time. I think we've exhausted the forensic evidence, save for one thing, and that's finding Adam's family. Someone someday will be either arrested or their DNA will be taken, and Adam's DNA profile is on file. And that could be checked and found, and the whole thing then comes up again. Joyce Ozagidi has passed away, so any progress with her has gone.
She gave you a name, though, of the boy she said she handed over to people traffickers who brought him to London. You must have thought at that point you had identified him.
Yes, and it was particularly so with a member of the media, and they progressed that. They even had a photograph of him, but we found through DNA that he wasn't that child when we found the family in Nigeria.
How frustrating was that?
It's part of any murder investigation. You're hopeful, dust yourself down, start again. Detectives in this day and age will always have to be resilient. You get hopeful, you get buzzing, and then you let down, but you keep going. You just keep going. And the main thing about any investigation is the search for the truth. The truth will come out. Someday someone will say what happened. We don't know. Perhaps the 2 girls that were with Adam under the care of Joyce, they've been nearly 30 now. They may remember something and say something. Or other people would have been involved in the murder of Adam. It doesn't take one person to hold him down and cut his throat and dismember him, and then where are his body parts?
Do you think the truth will come out eventually then?
I'm hopeful the truth will come out. The case hasn't been written off. It may not be actively investigated right now, but something could come up. And all it needs is that little bit of tie together forensically, and it starts over again. And that could be from his family, or it could be from someone who's arrested who say, actually, I know something about a murder that occurred back in 2001.
You didn't solve the murder, but there was a lot of learning from it. And there is a very positive legacy from the investigation that's spun off into helping subsequent crimes be solved.
Many crimes, not just crimes as well, but where bodies have been found, you can prove where they're from.
This is the legacy of the forensic.
The legacy of the forensic, where it can be for missing persons or bodies that are found. But there's one particular case where it did come to the fore, and that was the 7/7 bombings. And as we know, they bombed 4 parts of London, 3 tube trains and 1 bus. They all met at Luton, and when you travel that back, 3 of them actually hailed from Leeds, 1 of them from elsewhere. But the flat that they used in Beeston, they found a lot of ingredients for explosives. They had said that they had undertaken the bombings because of what had happened to their people in Afghanistan and elsewhere. We were able to prove from the hair of one of those bombers that they had actually been in Pakistan before the war in Afghanistan, and therefore had been trained by Al-Qaeda or whatever affiliated group in the making of bombs and terrorist actions well before that claim. And this was done through the analysis of the isotopes in his hair.
So techniques pioneered with the Adam investigation are now perhaps used more widely and standard.
Very much so. So that comment made in the Gold Group of where can forensics take us, Ray setting up the conference, challenging the forensic world, and then developing the isotope analysis into you are what you eat, now has helped many, many crimes, not just in the UK, elsewhere.
And of course you brought to attention that dark world of human trafficking and ritual killings that really we're not very aware of, but are happening perhaps on British soil.
Yeah, it brought to attention that this does go on. It goes on all around the world. And I think the focus, the dedication and the investigation by the team prevented others occurring as well.
Thank you, Andy, for your insights.
Thank you for the trip down memory road.
And I mean, more importantly, thanks for your dedication, for your efforts to get justice for Adam. And who's to say that your successors one day might identify him and bring his killers to justice?
Let's hope so.
Martin, what a story. Even though justice for Adam remains elusive, perhaps it isn't just about solving a crime. This was such a pioneering investigation with huge forensic advances made, which we're now benefiting from today.
Although they didn't find who killed Adam, there is a huge legacy of the pioneering work that was done that's being used to solve many other crimes and has been used to solve many other crimes in the 25 years or so since the discovery of Adam's torso. And I particularly think about the pioneering forensic work. And I remember Ray Feisch, who was in charge of that forensic operation, telling me how he came up with the idea of, in the early days, trying to find a relative of Adam by looking at the possibility of familial DNA connections. Now, today, if any of us want to find long-lost relatives or even identify people that we are connected with, you simply go on the internet, you connect with a company, you send a sample of your own DNA, and that will be used to find often close relatives that you weren't aware of. 25 years ago, that was something that hadn't been done, certainly not in a criminal application. And I remember Ray Feisch telling me how he didn't have the computer programs that exist now. So he had to sit on his living room floor in his timbered cottage in Kent with a computer that existed at the time and an entry into the fledgling DNA database, which was a record of something like 750,000 people who'd been charged with criminal offences, and using coloured crayons and paper and noting down all of those he could identify who could possibly be connected to a young black boy discovered in London, and having to create these charts of his own. Now, in the end, he came up with a few dozen potential people who could be connected in a family sense with Adam, but when he explored each of them with some very painstaking detective work, none of them proved to have any connection with Adam. But it just shows you how far that kind of scientific work has come and how much more easily it's done today.
It's also, I think, important, Martin, to note when this happened and why so much effort went in. Can you put a bit of context around that for us?
Adam's torso was discovered 2 years after the publication of the William Macpherson report into the Stephen Lawrence murder. And the broad upshot of the judge's findings was that the Metropolitan Police hadn't investigated Stephen Lawrence's murder properly because it was institutionally racist. Now, that was a very damning indictment of the force, and I think, and it's difficult, I think, for Andy Baker to corroborate this, but I think there was a perception that the Met saw this as a great opportunity, perhaps the first opportunity to show that it was learning from the mistakes of the Lawrence investigation, where it hadn't bothered as much as it should have done to investigate that murder. This was an opportunity for the Metropolitan Police to show that it was learning the lessons, that it wasn't institutionally racist, and it would be prepared to put in a lot of time and effort and money into investigating a very, very complicated murder that, for very good reasons, could have been shelved.
Listening to Andy, though, and you know Andy very well, you've travelled with him, you've been to South Africa with him. For him, I think, yes, it sits against that backdrop, but I think there was also a real personal connection with that being a little boy who'd suffered terribly.
Yes, Andy Baker said that it wasn't to do with the fact that Adam was black. Now, I think a lot of people would argue that that did play a big role because it came so soon after that branding of the Metropolitan Police as institutionally racist. But Andy is, and I've known him many, many years, he's a very emotional guy who does engage with the cases that he's involved in a way that some other detectives perhaps don't. He did make an emotional connection with this case. And I think it's reflected in the way that, although he wasn't able to solve it, he did oversee a lot of pioneering work. And I think Andy Baker also is a shining example of what doesn't always happen in crimes, that the victim is very much at the centre of what's going on.
Do you share Andy's optimism that one day somebody might come forward with a piece of information which allows detectives to eventually solve Adam's case?
I'd love to think that it would happen, but I truly think that it's very, very unlikely after all this time that somebody is still out there with vital bits of information that might lead to the prosecution of somebody who was involved in Adam's murder.
It'd be easy to view the Adam investigation as a failure. For all the effort and cost, he wasn't identified and nobody was charged over his killing. But the advances in forensic science, the international cooperation and the sheer determination of the team to seek justice do seem to have left a lasting legacy. Adam's story has shaped the future of crime solving in significant ways, giving investigators new forensic tools. It really does seem a bittersweet legacy. Hey listeners, True Criminals is a new show and your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps us grow, reach new listeners and keep bringing you the stories you love. This episode is brought to you by Audio Bleach Global. Our producer is Russell Barnes, with audio production by Andrew Chappell. The original score was composed by Chap Mannequin, artwork by Bleached, executive produced by Lee Mann. Follow True Criminals on Instagram at true.criminals and on YouTube at youtube.com/@true-criminals. For exclusive content and ways to support the show, visit us at patreon.com/truecriminals. For partnership opportunities, please contact us at contact@audiobleachglobal.com.